Hello ladies, I'm so sorry I can't be with you today. My name's Jane Walker and I'm the founder and CEO of the Purple Community Fund. So we're going to do a video recording today for you, and then a bit later on I'm going to hand over to Claire, and Claire's going to talk to you about all the latest updates of Purple Community Fund. So where do I start? Let's see, I was 33 years of age. I was working for News International. I had a very good job with them. But I was a little disillusioned about selling newspapers, and so I decided that I would take a couple of months off work on a sabbatical and just think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I decided to go to the Philippines for my sabbatical because I knew they were English speaking, and they had wonderful dive sites and beautiful beaches, and I just had this amazing thoughts of just relaxing by the beach and deciding if this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Of course, as soon as I arrived, I bought a newspaper, and when I read the newspaper, I read stories of children and families who were living in shanty housing, and these shanties were being bulldozed down to make way for new roads. The photographs were really shocking, and I was very curious about what a shanty town looked like. So I jumped in a taxi and I asked the taxi driver to take me to the worst squatter area that he knew. He was a bit nervous and said, white women shouldn't go, but I promised him I'd stay in the taxi. But as soon as I got to the shanty areas, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Tiny pieces of second-hand wood was nailed together, which was making walls. And then on top were rusty corrugated sheets of metal to make a roof, with an old car tyre on the top to secure the roof to stop it from blowing away. And families, whole families, were living in these tiny little shacks. They were literally no bigger than a small garden shed. So I jumped out the taxi then because I wanted to have a closer look. And when I looked inside the shanties, I could see that there was no running water, they were really dark, there was no electricity, probably no sanitation. They were just awful places. And I saw these two little boys walking along the road, and one of them had a great big metal hook in his hand which he was swinging in the air, and the other one was dragging a sack behind him, and they were walking towards a dirt track. So I followed them. I couldn't see any parents or any older brothers or sisters with them, and I got to the dirt track, and these two little boys, they turned around and they stared at me, and this was the most defining moment for me in my life, because I looked at these boys and they were cut, they were dirty, they were emaciated, they had the most awful look in their eyes, this far away, distant look. And I looked into the distance behind them and I could see rows and rows of shanty housing. And I'd realised that I'd stumbled on a whole community of people that were not only working in this rubbish dump, but they were also living on a rubbish dump as well. It was a massive landfill site. And there were hundreds and hundreds of children. Some of them were only 2 years of age, and they were knee-deep in rubbish, foraging around looking for pieces of plastic and tin cans that they could put into their sack for recycling. This sight was so shocking, and I realised that these children were probably going to spend the rest of their lives here on this dump site and would most likely die, would never have a future, would never know what it was like to go to school. And the feelings of hopelessness and despair that I got as I stood and looked at these boys and looked at their environment actually became a very familiar emotion for me, which was a surprise because I had not felt those emotions in a very, very long time. But it took me back to a time in my childhood where my family was, I guess the modern word would be dysfunctional. So my father had a very, very bad temper. My mother was emotionally unstable and tried to commit suicide several times, and that actually translated over to me when I was 12. I was so stressed with my environment that I also tried to take an overdose of paracetamol. When I was 15, they told me they didn't want me to live with them anymore. They gave me £15 and put me on a bus, and I was on my way to Bournemouth. I did know how to work hard, so I decided that I didn't want to sleep on the streets. So I knocked on every door of every hotel that I could find until somebody offered me a job. And I was one of the lucky ones. I was offered a job as a live-in chambermaid in a hotel in Bournemouth, and that literally saved me from a life on the streets. And so that was the end, really, of my feelings of despair and hopelessness, because I was starting a new life. And by the time I was 16, I was completely financially independent. I was in a bedsit on my own, and I started a new career, working my way from the bottom up in the newspaper industry until now. I'm now looking at these two boys and I'm realising I'm the professional. Of course, I wanted to put my hands in my pocket and give these boys all the money I had and just say to them, I hope everything works out for you, because it was overwhelming to see all those children and all those parents working and living in this trash. I had no idea what anybody could do to help them. But as I was thinking that, my conscience really got the better of me, because I remembered how the teachers didn't report the bruises that they saw on me when I was growing up, and how the social workers didn't believe the stories that we told them, and how the doctors didn't really get alarmed when I had eating disorders and the police told me to run away. I would be abused when I reported abuse to the police when I was younger. Those professionals had the opportunity to help me and rescue me, but for some reason they didn't. And now I'm the professional in front of these two boys, and I could see the cries for help in their faces. So I decided that I would do whatever I could to help them have a better future. And so with that, I returned back to England and I started to research why there were child workers in the Philippines, what could be done to help them. And I came to the conclusion that poverty at this level impacts into every area of a person's life. And so if I was going to start a charity to help, then I would need to be involved in everything. And so I went back to the Philippines and I asked the families, what would you like me to do? And they said, educate our children. They pointed me into the direction of an old warehouse. We went in, we shoveled all the rubbish out the warehouse. It was from the floor to the ceiling. I uncovered a rat's lair. The rats were very scary in the Philippines. They're twice as big as they are here in England because they live on the rubbish dumps. They have an endless source of food and they get mange and they just look really scary, hairless rats. There were spiders as big as my hand. Cockroaches, when they're fully grown, they have wings, they fly everywhere. It was terrifying. But for the families, they just laughed at me being so scared, because really rats and cockroaches and terrifying insects are things that they had grown up with all of their lives, just like we have with cats and dogs. They were not afraid in the slightest. But we did work very hard. We painted the walls, we cleaned the building that we were now going to call a school, and I advertised for anybody with teaching experience to come and help. Well, by this time I had run out of my savings and my lovely sister was helping me, so I was in an internet cafe trying to send her an email to ask her if she could send me more money. And this man was next to me and he asked me what I was doing. So I told him I was trying to build a school or develop a school for children on the dump site. And he asked if he could come and have a look. Well, I said, absolutely. Well, he looked like Omar Sharif. He was half Indian and half Chinese. And when he stood up, he was 6 foot tall. I thought, oh gosh, he's gorgeous. So he jumped in a taxi and we went on to the dump site. I showed him the dump site and I turned around to talk to him and tears were streaming down this man's face. And I just thought, oh my goodness, he's tall, handsome and sensitive. It can't get much better than this. But he confided in me and said to me that he was a poor boy when he was living in India, and a British woman came to his village and offered to sponsor 9 children in the village into school and then later into college. And he was one of the lucky ones. He then went on to say that he was an offshore banker in Jersey. I thought, oh my goodness, it can't get any better than this, can it? And he then said to me that he was so moved at what he was seeing on the dump site, and even him living as a poor child in a shanty area in India, he had never seen poverty as severe as what he was looking at right then. And he promised that he would give me enough money to feed 200 children, and he would pay for my airfares and my hotel bills so I could travel and live in the Philippines while I was developing the charity and then go back to England and raise some more money. And he was faithful to that promise for 4 years until he got married, actually, and then it stopped. But those 4 years were fantastic years because they enabled me to get a good solid foundation on the work in the Philippines. And in those 4 years, I'd learned to educate the children. I had managed to live on the dump site and work with the families and learn that everything that they were experiencing was all about food instability. The children needed to go back to work to earn money for food. And this is something that I didn't understand. And when I lived with them at the weekends, I realised that we would sit down to eat a meal and it would just be a big bowl of rice on one plate. And all of us would put our hands into the rice and we'd dip them into soy sauce. And then I'd ask what was for breakfast the next day. And every time, week after week, the families would say the same thing. Whatever was left over from the evening meal, whatever was left over in the pan, that was breakfast. And I realised that these families were living on a meal-to-meal existence. No wonder it was hard for me to keep children in school. They really did need to go onto the dump site to pick up waste to earn money for food. So we designed a programme that changed and revolutionised our work. We introduced a food for school programme where children could earn rice credits for coming to school every day, canned foods for academic achievements, vegetables for grooming and behaviour. By Friday, the children would go home with a massive bag of food, and that would be the equivalent as if they had worked on the dump site for a whole week. School attendance was almost 100%. Academic achievements started to go through the roof. The parents were so supportive of the children, putting them in education, and we had an absolutely massively successful education programme for these child workers. So much so that child labour virtually ended on that dump site. And because it ended on the dump site, it then meant that we could turn our attention and look at the parents and what was happening with them. And what we realised is that actually many of the parents couldn't really even afford to feed themselves. And so we looked for the most disadvantaged parents. They might have been grandparent-headed parents, widows, single parents, or maybe disabled or injured in some way. And we taught them how to make pieces of jewellery from beads and pearls that we were buying for them. One day the economic crisis hit in 2008, the recession, and we couldn't afford to buy these pearls anymore and the beads. But we knew that the women and the men that we had in our little programme were feeding around about 175 children. So if we were to stop it, because we couldn't afford to buy the pearls anymore, all these children would go hungry again. So myself and my managers, we all went to the dump site and we looked for pieces of recyclables. And we came back with toothpaste tubes, glossy magazines, newspapers and ring pulls. I can remember putting a handful of ring pulls on the table and saying to the women, here, I think you can crochet that into something. And with that simple instruction, the women then started to crochet the ring pulls, and they designed the most amazing bags and purses and jewellery, and that inspired us. So we started to make things from toothpaste tubes, and we learned how to roll beads from magazines, and made this most amazing range of recycled materials, and realised that when people started to buy these, they really loved the products. And we realised that because we were able to sell so much, it was giving these parents a sustainable income. And actually, it was far better for the parents to earn the income and provide for their own children than it was for us. And so our attention turned to setting up livelihood programs for as many people that we possibly could, as many parents as we could in the Philippines. Well, I'm going to end there because otherwise, if I carry on, I'm going to say everything that Claire's going to tell you. But I hope you've enjoyed listening to me for a few minutes, and I'll now hand over to Claire. Thank you.